Let's talk about the outro to the intro to the main game, the expository cutscene. It's not very good. That's kind of a shame because it's the most important cutscene in the game, structurally speaking. It's the one you watch before you start to play. So if you watch this cutscene and then you play the game, you think you're in for a mediocre game because there was a mediocre cutscene, but that's not true. The game is great. It's just got this mediocre cutscene in the worst possible spot for reasons. I don't know why. My guess is that this cutscene is kind of mediocre because it was made early on. The studio had to sell themselves to Microsoft, and I think my wild guess is that this cutscene was something they put together to sell themselves to Microsoft. And then they never went back and really polished it up after they got, the actual money, the actual Microsoft development stuff. And it feels like that's what happened because it doesn't feel like they got their feet under them. It doesn't feel like they've got their practice in. They don't really seem to know how the comedy should flow or how the characters should act or how the pacing rolls along in this game. It's like the first thing... It feels like the first thing you write when you're hired onto a new IP and you don't really have a feel for it yet. That's what this feels like to me. Let's start with the humor. Let me know if you think this humor is as forced as I do.
No, not her. I won't kill.
That bozo's brain was booby-trapped.
That humor feel natural to you, bringing out two different kinds of rodents and having a man hugging a fish? The editor is trying, so is the music team. They're really trying to make this flow. But this humor doesn't connect to the scene in any way. In the rest of the game, the humor normally arises from the scene or the characters in a very natural way, and it enriches the experience. It enriches the scene, the characters, the progression. It makes things better by existing. Not just in terms of making sure the pacing doesn't feel too heavy, but in terms of actually having a reason to exist. It really shines. And this scene doesn't do that. All of the jokes come from nowhere, go nowhere, accomplish nothing, enrich nothing. They're very, very basic, and that's just not as good as the rest of the game. Another thing that's not as good as the rest of the game is that these scenes don't move. Most of the scenes in the game have a feeling of momentum. They're going somewhere. They're building. This scene does not. This cutscene is more or less flat. One of the big reasons for that is because they are addicted to round-robin dialogue. If you don't know what round-robin dialogue is, let me demonstrate.
That bozo's brain was booby-trapped.
Yes, whoever hired Lobato to kidnap Truman knew he might be psychically interrogated.
The poor thing looks terrified.
Did anyone get a good look at his boss?
I saw him, but I couldn't tell who he was.
Everybody got one line? Character A, one line. Character B, one line. Character C, one line. Character D, one line. Character E, one line. This is like a high school way of writing your crowd scenes, and it's got some very serious drawbacks. It can be worthwhile to do it once or twice at the beginning or end of the scene in order to establish the characters or how the scene is resolving, but it doesn't really work very well to move the scene. So if this was the only time it happened, it wouldn't be a problem, because now we kind of have a feel for everybody who's here and what their personality is like. But this is not the only time it happens. It happens continuously until the end of the scene, until the end of the cutscene. So the problem is that you can't put any movement into a scene where you're doing round-robin conversations. First off, you can't put any physical movement in, because all of the characters have to be ready, and the player has to be aware that these characters exist in the space of the scene at this particular moment. You have to lock all of those characters down, which means they're not allowed to move, your camera shots can't move, nothing can move. The big action in this, the huge blocking moment in that particular conversation, was that a rat jumped on Lily's lap and she pet it. that's no movement. That's all locked in. Everything is just as flat as possible, because otherwise the player is going to be a little bit confused as to where people are when they start talking. The other problem is, of course, that it's hard to get it to move anywhere emotionally, because there's just a whole bunch of different characters, each with their own little thing to say. You can make it move emotionally. This is usually done by providing an anchor character, usually a villain. Vegeta comes down and says, like, "I'm going to blow up your moon, Kakarot!" And then all of the heroes get exactly one line to oppose Vegeta as Vegeta drags the scene into his pacing. That can work, because then you're still moving the scene. This is not how to do that, though. This is flat, still waters. There's nothing happening here. There's moss growing on these characters. And that's never a good thing, especially in this game, because this game's specialty is making sure that the player is along for the ride. And if there's no ride, it's not going to happen. You might be thinking, "Oh, Craig, can you give us an example of when the game does bring you along for the ride?" I can! This next bit should bring you along for the ride. It's the only part of this whole cutscene I like. Take a look and see how it moves. It moves on every level.
And I saw something else. I saw the thing that terrified Lobato. It was a woman, dressed in black fur. She was floating over the ruins of a city, and she was commanding serpents of water. There was something familiar about her.
Rasputin, I'm going to show you a picture.
That's her! Wait a second. I thought I recognized her. True Psychic Tales issue 43.
So I'm not going to claim that is the best time, the best way that they've ever moved, but it happened to be in a really good spot to demonstrate it. That is how scenes can move. Things are happening, and there is some inertia, some momentum. And there are a lot of elements that make this possible. One thing, of course, is the fact that something is actually developing. People are discovering things, and the situation is evolving. But more than that, we're also along for the ride as characters begin to express themselves. And part of that is in the blocking. For example, we've got him turning around and clicking a button, which might seem like a small thing, but blocking is quite important. It helps to establish the character's emotional relationship to the world and each other. And in this case, we're seeing that he has Maligula on speed dial. He presses a button and Maligula's file pops right up. This means that not only is Maligula important to him, it's important enough that the ship itself is primed to show her dossier whenever we need it. Also, Raz gets out of his seat, stands on his own 2 feet, faces the people he admires more than anybody else in the universe, and tells them that he knows who he saw and what the threat is. That might sound overblown, but that's what blocking does. Blocking is a way to establish that kind of relationship progression. You have someone move, and it means something. Now, in this case, I'm not sure how much of that was on purpose. I have a sneaking suspicion Raz got out of the seat because they couldn't animate him pulling the backpack, the thing out of the backpack while he was sitting down. But as blocking goes, it's a fantastic move because it makes him stand on his feet, look to his heroes, and present his findings and develop himself. I think that's a really good piece of blocking. Now, it pales in comparison to most of the rest of the game, which we'll talk about when we get to most of the rest of the game. But for this scene, this is good. And it's not just the blocking. There's also things like music.
That's her! Wait a second.
All of these things combine to help to pull the player into the scene. And that's something that this game excels at, and it's absolutely critical at all stages of this game. Because did you notice the massive, glaring plot hole?
I thought I recognized her. True Psychic Tales issue 43.
Now, maybe you don't pick up on this the first time through because you don't yet know how big a plot hole this is, but Raz not recognizing Maligula except for from Psychic Tales 43 is like someone of Jewish descent seeing a picture of Hitler and saying, "Oh, I recognize him from Captain America, Volume 3. This lady killed his family, his grandparents' generation, drowned his country, drove his family out of the Tsar's palace where they were performing in their circus, and has made them live in squalor ever since. And she's almost certainly the reason that Raz is cursed to drown in water, or to die in water, because that's kind of what she did to everybody. But chances are you never noticed that this was a serious thing. Like, you can argue it's not a plot hole. You can argue there might be an explanation for it, but they never give an explanation for it. But the more important thing to take away here is that if you have a plot hole, the way to fix your plot hole is not to fix your plot hole, is to fix the scene around your plot hole. Because if the scene is moving and it's pulling the player along for the ride, then if the ride gets bumpy, the player is fine with it. As long as the player is in the scene, they won't notice when things don't make a whole lot of sense. And this is something that this game relies on heavily because, as I said, most of their plot twists are extremely basic, but they pull you into the scene so you don't even realize they're coming. And then when they hit like a hammer. It's great. And that's entirely based on how they make their scenes move. You gotta move and get into the flow of things, and they're great at that. Usually. Let's do another round robin and grind this entire scene to a halt.
She's on the cover.
Maligula.
The Deluge of Grulovia.
Maligula? She's been dead for 20 years!
Ford Crawler killed her himself.
A battle from which he never truly recovered.
She was a monster.
Boy, we sure are moving now. What an incredibly important exchange that was. So the problem here is that there is no emotional flow to this scene. Nobody wants anything. Nobody's going for anything. Nobody's developing in any way. We had that one beat where Raz gets up, but after that it is all just, let me explain one of the villain's backstories in great detail, even though Raz should already know it, and Raz should be upset about it, so why isn't Raz the one telling it? I'm not sure why they made that decision. It would make a lot more sense to me. My instinct would be, yeah, Raz knows who the Deluge of Grulovia is. He's Grulovian. He knows he knows who that is. And it would make sense because he would have something to say. He would say, I didn't see his boss, but I did see the Deluge of Grulovia. And you would feel that he had some emotional connection to that. And you could pull that into the scene and it would amp everything up. And he doesn't have to go screaming off the handle or anything. He just has to say, like, you have to feel coming out of him that this is serious business. He knows who this lady is and you do not screw with her. But that doesn't happen. Instead, we get this marvelous piece of dialogue where we explain who she is. Notice how the camera operator and the music team desperately try and make this be even vaguely interesting. But they can't because there's no movement. They're trying to create movement, but the scene is written with no movement. Watch.
A ruthless, power-hungry psychic who drowned hundreds of her own countrymen. Nevertheless, she still has her loyal followers to this day. This file documents recent activity believed to be the work of these modern-day delusionaries.
What are they up to?
Well, it's ridiculous, really. There's no scientific basis to necromancy.
What?
They're trying to bring her back to life?
It's silly, darling, but if they believe they can do it, they might do some dangerous things.
So, it's the height of arrogance to go through a scene and say, well, let me tell you, if I had made this scene, it would have been so much better. But I do want to talk a little bit about potential alternatives to this approach. I'm not going to claim that they're the best alternatives, but let's just discuss one of the biggest problems here. They don't seem to have any level between everybody gets one line and Sasha talks nonstop. If Raz had been the one doing the explanation as to who she is, maybe Lily says, who's the Deluge of Grulovia? And then Raz has to explain it. And then when Raz is explaining it, there's emotion, there's tension, because he knows what's going on. But he's like, at the end, he's like, but she's dead. She's been dead since before I was born. And then Sasha comes in and says, oh, well, you know, they're trying to, she has followers to this day, the delusionists. They're trying to bring her back. And then you can get a nice close-up on Raz as it sinks in. And then you got some stakes. You got something that you care about. And maybe there's a reason why they absolutely require Raz to know nothing about this. Maybe they have some kind of obsession with making Raz a complete blank slate window character. I don't know. But the fact that there is zero emotion to any of the things that Sasha is saying, there's no investment or progression in any way, is a serious problem for me. The only time this works at all is when he does this beat, when he says, it's silly, really.
These modern-day delusionaries.
What are they up to?
Well, it's ridiculous, really. There's no scientific basis to...
This beat is, at the very least, it exists. It's a thing, which is better than most of the other beats in this scene. But it's actually not paced very well, and it also is a very poor imitation of an actual bit of investment.
Necromancy.
What?
They're trying to bring her back to life?
Obviously, all in my opinion.
But if they believe they can do it, they might do some dangerous things.
Mia, have you considered the other disturbing fact in all of this? That unstable character.
Could never kidnap the Grand Head.
So Sasha and Mia talking to each other is a very powerful tool. In Psychonauts 1, it was one of the most powerful tools they had in their arsenal. The two characters are built specifically to talk to each other and be a sort of, you know, Mulder and Scully dynamic where they come at something from two different angles and they can really help the player understand all of the sides of this particular conundrum. Normally. It did not work here. There's a couple of major reasons why. One reason is that they're not looking at different angles. They're just looking at the same angle, and it's the same angle they've already explained like 4 times. Another is that the delivery is strangely terrible. Have you considered that poor character over there could never kidnap... What's my line? I think that the reason the delivery is so terrible is because of the joke happening in the background that you can see there, which we'll talk about in a minute.
Of the Psychonauts without help? Yes.
You mean...
There's a mole in the Psychonauts.
You think this is a mole, you're dumber than you look.
Yeah. So to me, that feels like one of the most forced jokes in this entire game. It's more forced than the Tooth Fairy jokes that I despised in the earlier tutorial section. This doesn't work because these characters aren't part of the scene. Dr. Lobato hasn't had anything to say. He has nothing to say. He's not developing in any sort of way. He's not in the flow of the scene. The creature sitting on him is also not part of the scene. This is just the devs deciding, oh, you know, we need to have a joke beat. So you know what we're going to do? We're going to bring in somebody to peek their head around and say, who needs a joke? It's distracting, it's pointless, it's not part of the flow of the scene, it's just terrible. Now I think the reason they settled on this as a joke vector is because if they have Lobato stay silent the whole time, it feels really evil because we're kidnapping Lobato, dragging him to a secret base, putting him into a lab, and ripping his mind apart. That's some pretty sinister shit. So I think that they were trying to lighten that by having Dr. Lobato be wacky, 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 so you won't notice the fact that we are going to torture him to death. But it doesn't work. It just makes the scene flow even worse than it was already flowing. Another issue I have with scenes that flow poorly, if a scene flows well, you get drawn in and you don't notice the speed bumps and the little issues. If the scene flows poorly, you're going to start to notice things that don't quite fit or feel a little bit unusual, are going to pop out at you. Like, say, if you recreate whole scenes from The Incredibles.
Approaching the Mother Lobe.
Okay, so one of the things I really like about this scene is this jet. I like how it doesn't have landing gear, it doesn't have, a gantry or anything. It's all psychic superhero stuff, and I think that works really, really well. The jet is the best part of this scene. And you might have been thinking that Craig was unusually harsh on that first part of the scene. That was the good half of the cutscene. Yeah. I'm trying very hard not to be incredibly harsh on the second half of this cutscene, but it's hard because this nearly ruined the game for me. And the problem is this lady in pinstripes. This part of the scene is specifically about introducing her. She's the new boss, and we're supposed to have to try and get along with her, try and prove ourselves to her. And this scene does such an incredibly poor job of introducing her that I thought she was going to just be a cheap obstructionist villain character. Because she has no merits, no personality, accomplishes nothing, has no motivations. It's written so incredibly poorly that I didn't even want to play the game. She's like, you gotta report to basic braining. And I was like, no. Why would I do that? It's clear you're not going to help me. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, but I wanted to make it clear to you that for me, the second half of this scene was bad enough that it nearly made me stop playing the game. When you come out of this scene and you enter into the main play of the game, and you're basically free roam, you have to ask yourself, well, what am I interested in? What is my long-term objective here? And if your long-term objective is go talk to the lady that you hate, that's not really a very good long-term objective. It just leaves me like, I guess I'll run around at random and do nothing for 20 minutes first. Anyway, let's talk about why this scene completely fails to set her up. The problem is that there is no motion in anything she does. She doesn't have a chance to reveal any sort of personal motivations or emotions, except for, I'm annoyed. Which is a valid emotion, but it's not going to make you connect to her unless the annoyance factor is somehow made into, something the player can also engage with. It just feels like she doesn't have any reality to her. She doesn't feel like a real person. Over the course of the game, you realize that she is an extremely motivated character. She wants to keep everybody safe. She wants to protect this entire organization, and she's struggling as hard as humanly possible. She's overwhelmed by desperate activities trying to figure out how to save as many people as possible. That doesn't come through at all. Let's watch.
Agent Forsyth, why did you deny us intel when we hailed the Mother Lobe?
What are you talking about, Agent 9?
That's a great question. What are you talking about, Agent 9? Who thought that was a good thing to open with? Who thought that was how Agent Forsyth should be introduced? Nobody played the VR game, so we don't know that she didn't give them intel during the VR game. And even if you did play the VR game, it's probably not at the top of your list of things to get answered immediately upon landing. It only allows her to basically say, no, shut up. And that's not good enough. It's making her react, and she can only react in a way to shut the conversation down. She can't react in a way to help it. Moreover, we're getting this backstory that nobody wants, or that we already just got. Watch as Mia comes in to make absolutely sure that we didn't miss the entire point of the last 5-minute scene.
We were on a mission to rescue the Grand Head of the Psychonauts. When we called for assistance...
I never heard any call. Who did you talk to?
Okay, so this is good, right? We're going to get a chance for her to investigate what's going on, and obviously there's a mole. So I can see why they're going for what they're going for here. They're going to try and have us get an insight into who the mole might have been. It's someone who can answer the phones, right?
It's not someone who can answer the phones. What the fuck are they talking about?
But it's someone who can answer the phones, according to this. So she's asking, Who did you talk to? Let's investigate a little bit.
Is he all right?
Oh, never mind. I don't give a shit. Oh, God. The scene is just collapsing. It's not even not going anywhere. It no longer even has a form. It's just shattered bits of scene that are being flung on the floor. Why would she interrupt her own mission-critical question to ask about a guy who is clearly under control and fine? So let's discuss an alternative. Obviously, coming up with alternatives for stuff like this is a mental exercise that they have lots of reasons for the way they do things, and I'm not going to pretend like this is the way it should have been. But let's presume that we are trying to make it so that we understand that Agent Forsyth is frazzled, overwhelmed, but really concerned about the safety and the welfare of her group. She's a hard ass, but she's got a heart of gold. That's kind of what we want. So when they land, let's say they land and they get out of the jet, and she immediately says, "Welcome back, Agent 9, and Agent, I forget Mia's last name. How did it go? Is everybody okay? Are there any injuries?" And then, they can say something, and then this guy comes floating out, and she says, "Is that guy injured?" You can see how it's the same basic pattern, but instead of saying, "Hey, how do the phone lines work? Please give us a long conversation about the nature of the telephone switchboard in the Mother Lobe." No, instead of that, we allow her to establish herself as someone who is active, someone who aggressively looks out for her team and for her people. And even when she doesn't know someone, she's still trying to get a handle on whether or not that person needs help. That would make a lot of sense.
Right?
We won't know for sure until we get that squirrel tested for rabies.
Who needs a joke? Now, this does do a good job of making sure that it doesn't feel like we're going to go dissect Lobato in a really sinister way, because Lobato isn't taking it seriously, so why should we? But it still doesn't connect to the scene at all. It's just Lobato being a jokester. If you compare this to Lobato's jokes during the first section of the tutorial, where he's like, "I'm not Employee of the Year. I'm the greatest dentist of our century." That humor flows so well. It arises from the scene. It enriches the characters, and it pushes the scene forward. And this is like, "Who needs a squeaky nose on our clown?"
This is our kidnapper.
Now, I do really like that Mia didn't actually answer the question. Her boss says, "Is that man all right?" And Mia responds with, "It's the kidnapper." That response says a lot. I'm not sure they intended it to say that much, to be honest, but it says a lot. Still, that line is not enough to save the scene.
Clearly, he had help on the inside.
Impossible. A mole in the Psychonaut?
So here, not only is she just shutting the conversation down again, being obstructionist, she's also delivering it in a way that clearly says, "My two best agents are idiots." And, not only that, she's repeating things we've already heard at least 3 times by now.
We have reason to believe delusionists are involved.
Did you ever play the Sam and Max adventure games? Yeah, I wonder if I can ask her to turn green or purple. Never mind.
And they're trying to bring back Malicula.
What?
I know. Isn't it great? The Psychonauts haven't had this kind of a threat in years.
Can someone help me with my dad? He's still acting funny.
So there we did have a little bit of a round robin, but this is at the end of the scene, and this is a moment when the round robin makes sense, because everybody's basically talking about where they're going to go, and what, you know, they're going to stop being in this scene, and it's going to start breaking up, and this is especially important if we're going to physically be in this world. Like in a movie, the people can break off from the scene and not tell you where they're going, because you're not going to follow them. You're not going to, you know, encounter them on your own. The scenes are going to be very carefully constructed. But if we're going to be in this world, and it's a relatively open world game, then we do have to know where the people are going and what they're doing, and a round robin is good for that.
Truman!
We're going to have another one in a second here.
Let's get him inside so he can lie down.
I'll see what I can find out in my meditation chamber.
I'm taking Lobato to my office for further interrogation.
I'm gonna talk to Otto about our military options.
Does that make anyone else a little nervous?
Who are you?
Alright, so here it is. For me, this is the worst sequence in the worst cutscene in the game. Coming out of this, I was left completely flat. I felt like I was in a hostile environment surrounded by people who did not want me there. I felt like my boss didn't want me there. I felt like my friends were refusing to help me get settled or, you know, help me even find my footing. It felt just completely flat and hostile. Like there was no point in even going into the Mother Lobe. Because what would I do there? Get yelled at? I'm hoping that it was just me. I'm hoping that that was something that it was just my bad reaction and most other people were okay with it, because that was a strong enough reaction that I very nearly just stopped playing. So let me talk about the problem here. On paper, this scene makes a lot of sense. Raz has become an official Psychonaut according to the grand Psychonaut hero, Ford Cruller. Ford Cruller made him into a Psychonaut during the VR game. But we can't allow him to be a Psychonaut in this game because it doesn't really fit the way that Raz works. We need to kick him back down to a student of some kind. So we're going to make him into an intern. And the idea is, I think, that we've got this tough but fair lady who's feeling kind of frazzled, and she's like, listen, Ford's not working on all cylinders. He's good at taking care of the kids in the camp, but he can't make new Psychonauts. Listen, everybody seems to like you. You seem to have pulled off a lot of stuff. Let me give you the intern treatment. Let me give you, here's an intern badge, and let's see what you got, if you got what it takes to be a Psychonaut. Don't be late. I hear the coordinator's a real brain buster. So on paper, that works pretty well. But for some reason, the voice director didn't direct this voice actress to actually deliver those emotions in her lines. And instead, what I hear is, listen, kid, Ford Cruller's a fucking idiot. He can't do any of that shit. But since literally everybody more important than me that's awake at the moment thinks that you're the best thing ever, and the one that's asleep will probably wake up and think you're the best thing ever, I guess I can give you this fakey fake visitor badge, you idiot. You fucking trash. Don't make any mistakes. You can see how those are two radically different interpretations of the scene. And I'm hoping that more people took it in the way that it was probably intended to be taken, rather than in the openly hostile and dismissive manner that I took it. And I wouldn't even be that upset if she was openly hostile to Raz. Like, Raz is just one little character. But in the course of this conversation, she's incredibly dismissive about the greatest hero of the Psychonauts, and she doesn't seem to hold any of Sasha's or Milia's opinions with any sort of concern at all, because they clearly said, you know, they're vouching for us, and she doesn't seem to give a shit. And that kind of dismissiveness makes me think that she's not in this to actually make the world a better place, and that's just wrong. I mean, her character is specifically here to try and save everybody and make things better. So the fact that she comes off like that was unfortunate. It really just did not connect for me. One of the reasons that it doesn't connect for me is, of course, the utter lack of motion in this scene. And we're going to talk about that. Let's talk about blocking. There's really no blocking in this scene. The only blocking is that Raz occasionally takes half-centimeter steps forward. This is completely insufficient. Raz is at the bottom of a staircase, and Agent Forsyth is at the top of a staircase. You're telling me you never did a camera shot where we could see that? Because that would communicate a heck of a lot about the situation we're in. Instead, it's just close-up, 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 until you fall asleep. Nobody moves, nobody goes anywhere. If she's supposed to be frazzled and overworked, where are the people handing her papers to sign? Where are the people she needs to wave away so that she can have this conversation with this random kid that showed up? None of that blocking exists, and it leaves the scene feeling extremely flat. Moreover, there's no emotional progression in terms of understanding the emotional weight of this scene for Raz or for Director Forsyth, which is unforgivable, because for Raz, this is a tragedy. Look, Ford Cruller himself said that I was a psychonaut, and now you say I'm not. That is such a tremendous emotional blow that it would make a tremendous amount of sense and be very compelling if we could see Raz react in a way that grew over time. Like if Raz is like, Ford Cruller, he gave me this Psychonaut badge. He made me into a Psychonaut. Yeah, I've been helping out. And then she's like, Ford Cruller can't do that. And then he's like, shit, okay, well, you can, right? You're the head. You're the second head of the Psychonauts. If that was an emotional progression that we could feel, that would work pretty well. But instead, it doesn't really feel like an emotional progression. It feels like he's explaining who Agent Forsyth is to the audience. I've been talking long enough. Let's just go through it. You're going to probably not take it as badly as I did. I hope you don't take it as badly as I did. Let's take a look.
I'm Raz. Rasputin? I'm, your newest Psychonaut?
How's that?
Ford Cruller, he gave me a badge. I've been kinda helping out.
Listen, kid. Agent Cruller is a hero. But he's not operating at 100%. He can hand out all the merit badges he wants, but he doesn't have the authority to commission Psychonauts.
But you can, right? You're Hollis Forsyth, lesser head of the Psychonauts? True Psychic Tales 146. You and Truman fought the Noodler together.
I prefer the title Second Head. If the other agents vouch for you, I might be able to get you a spot in the intern program. But don't be late for orientation. I hear the coordinator's a real brain buster. Welcome to the Mother Lobe.
Well, you can make up your own mind as to what you felt about that scene. I think that it would have been much, much more natural if she had been waving away like people who are making her sign papers and stuff, and she's clearly not giving her entire attention to Raz. That would at least give her an excuse for kind of brushing him off. But as it is, I started this part of this game out with such low hopes. Fortunately, the game is friggin' great. See you next time. Let's get back to the good parts.